Okay, let's see our numbers sort of balancing off here. So we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. I am delighted to have you with us today for this session in the Building an Equitable Future virtual conference. My name is Melanie Lytle. I am the academic director of the graduate programs in historic preservation here at Goucher College. And this year we are celebrating 25 years as the nation's first distance learning graduate program in preservation, one that I am pleased to say I graduated from myself. So I have the honor of introducing our guest speaker for this session, Lauren Hukamer, who is the Assistant Historic Preservation Officer at the City of Tacoma in Washington. And I wish that Goucher could claim Lauren as one of our own alums. Columbia University gets to do that. But I will claim her in another way, which is to say that Lauren is exactly the type of historic preservationist that we aim to nurture here at Goucher. And my hopes for our students and our graduates is that they inspire others with their creativity and empathy and commitment to equity in the ways that Lauren has inspired me. And I hope will inspire you during this session. This session is being closed captioned live. There's an option to turn that on at the bottom of your screen. All of the sessions today are being recorded and you'll receive an email once they are available. I invite you to use the chat to speak with your fellow attendees throughout the session. Go ahead and respond in real time to what you're hearing. Share your own related experiences and your resources. We have a good mix of people who RSVP'd for this today. Professionals who are working in arts, culture, community, and the environment. We have some current and some prospective students. We have our Goucher faculty and our alumni, a really remarkable group with, I imagine, some similar aspirations for a more accessible and an equitable preservation practice. We will have a Q&A at the end, so I ask that if you have any questions for Lauren, that you submit them using the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, rather than in the chat, which may be harder for us to keep track of. And I'll monitor your question submittals and put them before her near the end of the session. And with that, I will turn the session over to Lauren. Welcome, Lauren.
Hello, welcome. Thank you for having me. I'm just going to start my slideshow there. And I'm going to turn off my camera for a little bit. So I'm so glad to be here. When Melanie invited me, I was really excited because probably about 10 years ago, I was where some of you are about to begin my master's in historic preservation. And nobody was talking about race, equity, inclusion, anti-racism. And going to Columbia University, where I was probably one of the only people of color, that was very difficult for me. And I came in not with an architecture background, but with a background in history and journalism and bringing that into this career. And I really wanted to make more room and more space for telling those untold stories. So what I do is I'm the Assistant Historic Preservation Officer for the City of Tacoma. So welcome from Tacoma. And I help staff the Landmarks Commission with our preservation officer. And so that's all the regular stuff, design review, nominations, historic districts. But the other half of my job where I get to be really creative is doing our programs of outreach and education. And so the photos I have up now are images from some of our pretty creative programs. So the first one is where we did a youth program that was a poetry slam contest. And what we had was we asked youth to come and do spoken word about why is their community important to them, what do they think about the community, what do they love about it, what does it mean to them. And I say we didn't say anything about historic preservation, architecture, or planning, because that doesn't mean anything to them. The other photo is a community mural that was done with a collaboration of mural artists and then aspiring mural artists from the Puyallup tribe to tell the history of Tacoma. So it's just another example of sort of the sort of creative things that we do here at the city. What's going on here? Seem to be frozen. There we go. So a little bit kind of about my background and how I got into this. I am a multicultural, multiracial person. My mom is from Trinidad and my dad is from Mexico. And so when I was an undergrad, I was really trying to deal with those sort of different cultural backgrounds and what that means. And I got really into the Hapa movement. This is a photo from Kip Tholbeck, who was really talking about representation and being able to claim and identify with multiple cultural identities at once. And as I got into historic preservation, I thought, why can't we have architectural sites and historic sites and cultural sites that reflect that? Most people are not one identity, right? Most people have different stories to tell. And I got really interested in why do most of our historic sites not tell that full story. And so this is a picture of the Maravilla handball court in Los Angeles. And why was it was significant? Because it was a community center for many generations and for many different groups of people. The Latino community, the Japanese community, the Los Angeles community, and it has all this great, collection of newspapers and photographs inside of it of just all these different types of people. It was a fun story to tell. This is another example. When I was an intern, my boss was working for the National Trust for Historic Preservation and was a field project in Boyle Heights, which is predominantly Latino immigrant community, lower income, although now it is beginning to gentrify because Los Angeles, of course, is so expensive. And so what was interesting about this is that it's a 1930s garden apartment, but it wasn't really significant for its architecture. What was going on, and this fight has been going on for, I want to say almost 15 years now, is that developers wanted to demolish this because they want to build that new housing for new communities, the gentrification communities, the new cafes, new people coming in, sort of the younger working professionals. And the community really banded together and wanted to prevent that. And so they used historic preservation as a tool to say that this property, is historically significant, is culturally significant, maybe not because necessarily of architecture, but because of what it has meant to the immigrant community for generations. And they really do have a strong community. It's not just a regular apartment. I mean, they have their own festivals and celebrations and gatherings and traditions that happen in this community. And people who are second generation Americans, they go to college and then they come back to this community. It really meant something to them. And so what we were doing is helping them document this, helping them write it in a way that the historic preservation community could see it, right? So we were working with oral history, we were working with historic photographs and just helping them tell that full story. So before I got into historic preservation, I studied journalism and history and business in undergrad and worked as a journalist for a few years. And so one of my first internships was to write this book called Our Hometowns. And it's for a small local newspaper in Washington State. And what they do is every few years, they do sort of like a oral history photo coffee table book. And so they collect these historic photos from members of the community, right? And then we collect the story, usually an oral history story, and write it up in this book so people just kind of can see their history, document it and see the history of the place. And so I think it was just such a powerful experience for me as sort of a beginning writer, journalist, and historian, because you're working with people's personal memories, people's personal stories, their personal collection. These photos came from their family albums, their grandparents' photos, and they had to open up and tell me a piece of their history, and I had to document that, right? And I think I learned a little bit about the difference between truth and fact, and that what the stories they were telling me were true, but not always factual in terms of, like accurate dates or locations and things like that. And so I sort of had to blend that when I wrote it, because I would write the story that they gave me and then maybe contextualize it a little bit, right, with some facts. And I think I learned to really respect their individual stories there. And so with that, I want to say, it's so important to respect local knowledge. As you are all professionals, I think we get used to talking to other professionals and we get used to sort of looking for that professional information, right? Documentation, all of that. And I think we really need to respect the stories and the people who are making and living in that history, right? So connect with your Asian community, your Black community, your Latino community, the people who are in that community. And to that end, I'm going to show you a video here. So this is a video that the Puyallup tribe made for us to use for public events, and it is a land acknowledgement video. And I encourage any of you, most people who are in the US are going to be on some tribal land. And as you do your work, it's so important to recognize their sovereignty.
It is the land right here that the Puyallup people have lived on since the beginning. This right here is where we are in the world, our homelands.
We work on our ancestral lands. We raise our children who go to school on the land of the Puyallup people.
We acknowledge that the Medicine Creek Treaty was signed for the whites to take our land for their benefit.
Land was assigned to our people. The Caucasians said, "This is your land," and they took that land from us too.
Our land was stolen from us. Treaties were broken.
But we are still here today.
Our people forage for food and materials, we pick berries, we canoe, we practice our traditional ways, and we speak Twelshutsi.
Just as our ancestors did.
We are finished.
Switch back to the PowerPoint. There we go. So with that, some of what I've taken away in my approach to historic preservation is what I'm going to talk about right now. So the first thing I think that's important is who is your audience? Developers, historic preservation professionals, SHPOs. It's not the same audience as working with a city council, city staff, the general public. It's not the same as working with a historical society versus working with a museum. So I think you really need to understand who your audience is, where they're coming from, and why they're trying to engage with you and why you should be engaging with them. So after you know who your audience is I think you should know, what does your audience need? And I base a lot of this on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And basically, his philosophy was that you can't pay attention to higher needs like art, culture, all of that, if you don't have your basic needs met, right? So your air, your food, your water, your housing. And I think sometimes we forget about that as historic preservationists because we know why it's important to us. And we want to go into communities and say, hey, you guys should be paying attention to this, right? Why aren't people paying attention? And I think that's why we oftentimes get the reputation that historic preservation is for upper class people, older people, richer, whiter people. And it's really because we need to connect it to those basic needs, right? If you're somebody who's just trying to make ends meet, trying to get your kids to school, trying to make sure your community is safe, you don't really have time to go listen to an architectural talk. And you're probably not going to try to make that time because you're thinking, why is this important to me, right? And so what I try to do when I work with the community is say that historic preservation is really important to those basic needs, right? It's about your housing. It's about your safe community. It's about how the community is going to look. It's about, preventing gentrification or causing gentrification, right? We want to balance that. But it's about all of those things, the economy. And so really trying to connect people to why is it important? Not just because, as we know and we believe, architecture and history is important. So the next part of that, I think, is how does your audience communicate? And I want to say you should always have a website and a phone and email that's easy to find, because if you're doing work out in a community with anybody, professionals to lay people, they're not going to find the time to figure out how to contact you. So if there's someone you want to contact or you want them to contact you, you have to make it really easy for them to find you, right? Social media, I think that's a tool we're using more and more, especially when we're working with communities. That's where people are. So I think understanding how to do professional social media, which is different from your personal social media, and also understanding what kind of audiences each platform reaches. Facebook tends to be a little bit older now, millennial and up. We used to be the young people, but we're not. And then, you see a lot of like organizations on Facebook, museums, that sort of thing. Twitter also does seem to be a little bit more of people who are public figures and people who are businesses and that sort of thing. And then Instagram, that's where I think you find a lot more of the younger community now. Obviously using YouTube to show different videos. TikTok, I've seen some really, really cool things in terms of historic preservation and like native and community stories on TikTok. And that's really hitting that younger, more diverse community. And it's really creative. Mass media like newspapers, TV, radio, they're always going to be there. So it's always good to connect with them. Every time we do public hearings and put out official communication, we use the newspaper, but it's really not where people are connecting and finding their main source of information anymore. Newsletters, publications, also good, but people are getting so many emails that it's really hard, I think, to get people to really read and engage with that. And then know what kind of style you want to use, right? Professional, formal, casual. I like to use the journalism standard, which is hitting an 8th grade reading level. So that means it's just more accessible to everyone. They don't have to put in a lot of thought trying to think, what are these technical words? What are you trying to say to me? Just reaches a wide audience, but it's not so casual. It's not emojis and necessarily in like, abbreviations. So putting all that together, I'm going to show you some of the events that we have done at City of Tacoma to engage people. These are some of our more successful events, and I want to say, like I said before, we didn't use the words, historic preservation or architecture or planning or any of those things. So I'm going to switch again to the videos. And the first video I'm going to show is about the poetry slam that we did.
Can you guys hear me in the back? Yeah. All right, guys, I'm going to do my poem. It's called Life Around Here. When I lost faith, I lost self. Who am I? This week I inhaled a stranger's resist I because I do what I gotta do to get by, even if inside I have to deny the truth.
The idea for the Poetry Slam in Hilltop came about as part of the Preservation Month in May, and we were approached by the city's preservation office to put on an event that highlighted some of the historical and, I guess, present aspects of the Hilltop neighborhood, using youth poetry as a kind of vehicle for that.
A big kid pushed between towers of muscle. Middle school was hell, high school even worse. No way to hide the weight, it became a curse. He didn't go.
So Poetry Slam generally is a poetry competition where you have 5 judges who rate poems between 0 and 10. We ask 5 people who generally don't need to know anything about poetry. Maybe they do, maybe they don't, it doesn't really matter. The idea is that whatever they find interesting about the poem is what they ascribe the score to.
This is the way I feel. No one can tell you the way I feel. So numb, but these stories are so real. In this life you spin your wheel. So real, so real.
Because it's representing Historic Preservation Month, for me, as I was working on this, I really was thinking about a lot of the community that's kind of being erased from the Hilltop right now. There's a big boom in our economy. We have a lot of new people moving in and some gentrification happening. And because of that, there are a lot of other community members that are leaving, a lot of businesses that are closing down while others open up.
I'd like to welcome the rest of the world to my block. A block where between the hours of sunrise and sunfall, we play dodgeball with gunshots. See, on this block, you can become a lost soul for standing in the wrong spot.
Part of it, for me, was also about hearing the stories that young people might say about the streets that they grew up on, the streets that they remember, and not just preserving what's here, but also preserving what was a part of the past and what's gone now.
With everything that my family's gone through, I don't know who to be happy for, me or them or everything or everyone, and it's hard to be happy for everyone when everything is changing.
I felt moved. I just felt really excited to see as many poets as we had standing up there, feeling confident, and once they got into it, it just kind of took over. Surprised also, you know, you never know what you're going to hear, and there is a lot of variation, a lot of depth. Overall, just completely moved and excited for the future.
But I was really, really impressed with the quality of the work. And I think I wasn't the only one. I think there were other people in that space who were really moved by at least one of the poems that they heard. And I know myself by many of them. And I was really stoked at the end. I thought the kids were really on point. Yeah, really solid poets.
I promise you that you will lose yourself before you ever lose the weight. And you will be weighed down by the beauty that you think you will gain. And I want to shake you, to make you see the error of your ways. But I'm afraid that if I do, I will break you.
What we like to say at the City of Destiny, Poetry Slams at Louder Than a Bomb, and generally in youth slams, is that the point is not the point. The point is the poetry, because we don't want to overemphasize a competition, because we don't really think that poets competing against one another is that interesting. It's really kind of dumb, frankly. But like the idea of getting people into the room together is really the goal. So we emphasize over and over again that the competition doesn't matter. And yeah, there are prizes, but I don't think anyone really left that evening feeling bad that they lost. I think everybody left that night feeling really glad that they came, and I think that's important.
Live and learn, it's a lesson taught. Through the stress you caused me, my buttons and you press them hard. Never thought I'd say it, but I'm better off to face it. My heart was just a game, you ripped my chest apart to play it. And if home is where the heart is, well then you used to be the roof over my head.
Just coming from a self-expression standpoint and working with young people, I know, and working with people who are experiencing homelessness also, I get to hear so many stories every day that don't really touch the light of day. And I recognize that there are so many assumptions about a lot of the young people that I've worked with and that I get to spend time with on a regular basis, and those assumptions are pretty off. And so I love the idea of just being able to see young people get up on the mic and share whatever their story it is, whether it's poetry or just journal entry. You know, I want them to be able to get up and feel proud of their story and share it so that other people can stop making assumptions about them and support them for who they are right now in this moment.
Right, so as you saw there, the Poetry Slam, we had such a packed house, and it was everything from, you know, kids, young people to professionals, county judges, and people were really emotional hearing those stories. And so I thought it was a really unique and interesting way to talk about preservation and community. So now I'll share another video.
Well, H.C. Weaver was an independent movie producer who had the great idea of making independent films in Tacoma, Washington during the 20s. once the studio was built on this 5-acre parcel at Titlow Beach Road, 1600 Titlow Beach Road, as a matter of fact, there was also some adjoining bungalows built. The hotel that was across the street, which we call the Lodge now at Titlow Beach, was actually a hotel at that time. It was like capitalization. Okay, let's capitalize on this film studio being here. And they actually drew up a plan, and we have some drawings of that, of Hollywood by the Sea. And it was no doubt going to be envisioned as the Northwest Hollywood. And why wouldn't it be, right?
Silent film was a rage. There were many other cities in the United States that were also looking to start up a film production studios, and Tacoma was unique in that they had a successful one.
Talking to local historians and museums, they said that Tacoma had a film studio in the 1920s down by Titlow Beach that filmed 3 films, and they were all lost since the 1920s. And a lot of research had been done, but no one had ever been able to track them down. So I started researching under the director's name and found out that Eyes of the Totem still existed at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City.
We now think that probably 1 out of maybe 10 of the thousands of silent films that were made actually survive and are viewable today. So when something like this comes along, where it's discovered that a fragment or some bit and you can view it again, it really is something to celebrate. And then when the extraordinary thing happens and you have the opportunity to see an entire feature film, to see the entire work of the artist of their day, it really is amazing. It was a core of people in the community that are already one way or another involved either in history or involved in film as an art form. And so the Team Tacoma, the group that have kind of been working on this, is sort of a balance between historians, kind of academic historians, and then people from our film community and our film history community.
Films at the time were hand cranked. The cameras were hand cranked, and as a result, anytime a film was made, there would be a variation in speed, not only because of who was cranking it, but also how they were being directed and told what to do. So as a result, there's a lot of variation in silent film in terms of frame rate. And when we watched the film the first time, a number of us were a bit concerned about the frame rate that we saw it being displayed, which was at 24 frames per second. Since we're the ones showing the film,
So I will post the rest of that video in the chat, but since we're kind of running out of time, I'm going to go back to the presentation if I can. So the Eyes of the Totem project, it was about restoring this 1920 silent film that was filmed in Tacoma. So it was both an artifact, of the time of all of the historic buildings and being able to see our downtown in the 1920s, right? And then it was also about bringing the community together. And I really got this idea from Last Remaining Seats in Los Angeles, where they invigorate all the historic theaters. And that's exactly what we did. We opened up a historic theater where the film premiered originally. We showed the restored film, and we had, I want to say, thousands of people come that night. And then next door, we had the Pythian Temple, which is a semi-secret society in Tacoma that's been there since I want to say 1905. And they had a historic speakeasy in their building. Obviously, it's not a speakeasy anymore, but they turned it back to that. And we just took Tacoma back to the 1920s and showed people, the history and the stories and the architecture. And it was so exciting. And it got so many people who wouldn't have come for something that was historic preservation related, right? Got so many people interested in Tacoma's history. It was regional, news. And so it was just a really unique and fun project and a way to connect with people. And so another way to connect with people, I think, is thinking about what's important right now, right, into the communities. This is a picture of Venice and cruise ships. And I did my master's thesis on cruise ship tourism in historic port cities and really tying it to sustainability, right? That's something that's really important right now that we should be thinking about, right? And how these cruise ships, right, are damaging the environment, which in turn is damaging, you know, the historic district. And Venice has got a lot of this going on with both the pollution and how that affects the buildings, and also, you know, the rising waters and all these very different things. And even the amount of people that come off a cruise ship is not sustainable for Venice, and so just their infrastructure too can't handle that. So kind of taking preservation, but then bringing it down to, you know, how does that affect our daily lives? And so I think every time you think about, you know, any sort of historic preservation project, whether you're doing a survey or a nomination or documentation, I think it's so easy to, you know, just look at those kind of primary sources that are just related to whatever you're looking at, right? Just the architect, the owner of the property. And I think it's really important to contextualize that, right? And to think about who else was involved, who else did this touch, who was important there. So many times when we see historic homes, they're named after the man, right? And actually in Tacoma, we have started using the man, the husband and wife's name oftentimes, because it's, you know, she was there too, right? So thinking about things like pre-contact, not prehistory. History existed before Europeans. You know, pre-contact, immigration patterns, economic patterns, agricultural history, environmental history. There are people who do preservation of heirloom seeds and fields and gardens to keep those things alive, right? Women's history, LGBTQ history, underrepresented communities. They take a little bit of extra work because you're not going to find those primary sources just laying there, right? People were hidden, people were silenced, right? So you have to do a little bit more work. You have to rely on different types of sources like oral history, you know, oral traditions, song, all of that sort of thing. So it does take, you know, a little bit more work. And then recognize that there are barriers to engagement, right? It's not necessarily because people don't understand or don't care or, you know, or not smart enough or anything like that, right? But people have busy lives. We have dedicated ourselves to, you know, history, architecture, all that sort of thing, but other people have other things going on, right? So thinking about income barriers, transportation, time, language, accessibility, feelings of exclusion. If you're trying to work with immigrant communities or Native American communities, they have a lot of reason to not trust, you know, officials or the government, and not want to be on things called a register. And so understanding that, right? And being able to kind of connect with what's going on with them. When we do our events, we do them in the evenings and on the weekends and at different times so that people who are working and going to school can come to our events, and we do them in different locations in the city so that we're not making everybody always have to commute. So let me see if I have time for a short video. Melanie, how are we doing?
I think you've got time for a couple minutes, sure.
All right, I'll just play part of this.
The following is a presentation of KBTC Profiles.
This is a map of Tule Lake concentration camp. Block 45 is where my family was. They were there for 3.5 years. I am a freelance writer and I live here in Tacoma, Washington. My father was born in the 1930s and he's Japanese American, second generation Japanese American. My grandfather and grandmother were sharecroppers in Northern California. When Japan attacked Pearl Harbor in December 1941. They were shocked like anybody else. President Roosevelt declared that day, December 7th, a day of infamy. 2 months later, he signed Executive Order 9066, which authorized the removal of Japanese Americans from the West Coast. My father and his family, 4 siblings, and my grandparents were forced within 2 months to pack up their belongings. They were told, we believe by the Japanese American Citizens League, to burn as many of the pictures, photographs, anything that had Japanese written on it that could make them look suspicious. They were shipped to Tule Lake. I had talked to my oldest aunt before she passed away.
So I'll post the rest of that video, let's see here, in the links. But the reason that I show it is because you're going to hear history that, what is going on? That you may not want to hear, that's uncomfortable for you for a variety of reasons. There we go. For a variety of reasons, right? Whether it's because the local community is not ready to acknowledge things that happen there in terms of painful things, you know, what was done to the Native American tribes, what was done to, you know, the Asian American community. In Tacoma, we have something called it's called the Chinese method, and it's what happened was in the late 1800s when there was all this fear, you know, of the other and of Asians. They rounded up people and basically shipped all the Chinese away, chased them out of town, literally with pitchforks, burned all their businesses. We had a Chinatown and a Japantown in Tacoma, and all that's gone now, right? And it's painful for both, you know, people who are from the dominant part of society, you know, white Americans, and it's painful, obviously, for Asian Americans to deal with that history. But I think it's so important to deal with it, right? And to listen to the story that's being told and not the story that you want to hear, and to listen to the people who it affected, right? So every time I tell these types of stories or work with these types of things that affect different cultures and different groups, I work with someone from those groups, right? It's not for me to tell the Japanese story. It's not for me to tell the Native American story, right? I go to the Puyallup tribe and I say to them, you know, we want to work with you, we want to get the story out, but we want you to be the voice, you know, and we want you to tell it the way you want to tell it. And it's okay if people are uncomfortable, because sometimes we just need to be uncomfortable. So here's another project that we did. It was called the Prairieline Trail, and it was basically an art interpretation project of the old railroad, which was turned into now a bike and walking path downtown. And we did an online component, online walking tour, and then a coloring activity book for kids. But we really wrestled with telling that painful story, right? It was Chinese immigrants who built the railroad, right? And their treatment of them. And they built it on land that we stole from the Puyallup tribe, right? And so we had all these artists from different communities, the Asian community, the Puyallup tribe, different Native American communities come and create an art piece that represented each of those stories. And at first, people in the city were a little uncomfortable because they were like, why are we going to celebrate these painful things? And it's like, it's not necessarily about celebrating the pain, it's about acknowledging the people who were there and what they went through. And I think we found a really nice and powerful balance when we did this. And I'll post the links later too. This is just an example of difficult history. It was a proposed conservation district.
Lauren, we can't see your screen.
Oh, whoop. That's weird. Okay. I think it froze a little there. Is it working now?
Yep, now we can see it.
Sorry about that. So this was the Prairieline Trail that I was talking about, and I'll post the links later. So this was a mid-century modern proposed conservation district in Tacoma. I love mid-century modern, was really cool. Long story short, what happened was that this neighborhood was built with covenants in the 1940s and 50s, a lot of these covenants were racially exclusive, and they said things like no people of color could be in the neighborhood unless they were servants and day workers, right? And of course, now that's not enforced, but it's still technically on the books because the way covenants work is you can't change the neighborhood covenant, even if they're not enforced, without a unanimous vote from the community, which is, you would think, easy to get for something like this, but apparently not. And so, this district went all through the Landmarks Commission and Planning Commission, and they approved it based on, the historic significance. And then when it went to City Council, it failed there because City Council did not want to preserve, a district that was about basically racism, right? About creating the ideal white community. And a lot of people who came and spoke, like the architect's granddaughter, she was saying, oh, we should preserve, my grandfather's vision. And that really hit people wrong because his vision was pretty racist. And so while I think this had a lot of architectural and historic merit, there's always that complicated history to deal with. And now actually state laws have been changed so that those covenants can be taken out of the documents without any votes. So wrapping up, these are just kind of the different types of events that we did. I always try to leverage those community partners, work with all different types of people in our community, tell all different types of stories. This last photo at the end is a picture of Dr. Nettie Asbury. She was thought to be one of the first African-American women who had a PhD. This is her home in Tacoma, and the picture's kind of blurred because we found it and we're now starting to document it. And what we're doing is we're working with the Hilltop community and the Tacoma Urban League and the Black Collective to work through a community land trust program, Forterra. And what they're going to do is Forterra is going to buy it from the owner because it's in an area that's gentrifying and the land is worth a lot. And then they're going to work with the Tacoma Women Colored Association to let them eventually buy it from the community land trust. And they're going to turn it into a community center for the Black community in Hilltop. So just an awesome collaboration. So again, here, just create an outreach program, using art, appealing to different audiences, young people, all of that. And so that is the end of my presentation. Thank you all, and I will be posting those links shortly.
Thank you so much, Lauren. I know that we already have a couple questions waiting for us. So those of you who have been listening, go ahead and enter your questions now, and I can put them before Lauren. The first couple of questions we've gotten actually are fairly similar to each other. Betsy asked, do you use events like the Poetry Slam and others as entree to more traditional preservation, like histories of neighborhoods and buildings, or let them stand alone? And then Sarah had her question was, well, how do events like the Poetry Slam, the Theater Revival get folks involved in longer term preservation efforts beyond just the one event?
Yeah, so I think it is sort of the entry level, right? Of before anybody can put a home on the register or want to nominate anything, they have to understand why we're even preserving historic resources, right? Why is that important to the community? And so these types of events do get people just thinking about, oh yeah, our community has got a lot of cool things, a lot of history, a lot of stuff that's important to us. And then once they're like, okay, thinking about that at the event, we talk about, with the Historic Preservation Office, here's how to nominate, here's all that sort of stuff. So then we do talk about the more traditional preservation. And then we have workshops that are like how to nominate and how to put your house on the register and what that means and all of that.
Great. I think we've learned a lot in this session about what is possible. There's a lot of different events and ways to engage communities that we perhaps weren't in the past. Do you have any suggestions for just one sort of first little thing that our session attendees could take today to start applying, what they've learned from your experience for themselves?
I think embrace being uncomfortable. Embrace challenging your own biases, and we all have that. It's not just for white people, brown people, Black people, we all have biases based on different things, right? So you really need to recognize that you're going to be uncomfortable and you should be uncomfortable, and learn to talk to different types of people. When I was in grad school, we only had one Black female professor, And people asked her, well, I don't know how to talk to Black people. How should I talk to Black people? And she was just like, what kind of question is this, you know? So if you're thinking to yourself, maybe you have a question like that, you might need to do some more research, you know, you might need to do some education on your own, you know, of why you feel that way, and be able to talk to different people.
Yeah, that's a good reminder, because I think we do often think that there's only certain groups that have to worry about sort of the cultural and the personal biases, but we all have some work to do. So I'm curious, you know, during this last year with COVID, I'm sure that that has affected a lot of the programming that you've been doing. And what sort of projects are on your bucket list once we get past this?
So actually, I think that COVID has allowed us to be even more creative and push even more boundaries, because we had to switch to an all virtual program. And so what we do is we partner with Pretty Goody Tours, and we took all of our programming and made it virtual. So virtual tours, you know, and we were able to do more because we were able to use drone footage and all that sort of thing, right, that you can't always get through just walking. And we did a kayak tour, right, with the GoPro camera, right, so people could see the waterfront from a kayak perspective. So I think it was great, and we reach an even wider audience because not everyone can always come to a one-time event. And so we would see like maybe a couple hundred people viewing live, and then in the next couple days, thousands of people viewing it on their own time. And that was really, really cool to see. Of course, you know, once we're done with COVID, I think we really are excited to get back into the community, because you can't do the same level of outreach. You can do the education, but you can't do the outreach unless you can kind of talk to people. And so we're really missing that, like talking to people face to face. We're doing another survey of one of our neighborhoods, and the outreach part has been challenging because we can't just say, let's have a community event.
Right. I think we have one more question that's come in. And it's, do you find that the land acknowledgement component of the programs captures people's attention and makes them think? And do you think that the tribal people's involvement is effective?
Is affected or effective?
Effective.
I think that the purpose of the land acknowledgement is for the tribes. It is to acknowledge what was done to them, and to acknowledge their land and their presence. So it's not about catching people's attention, really, and it's not about how effective it is necessarily to anybody else. It is really about acknowledging, respecting the tribe, and acknowledging them in the way that they want to be acknowledged. There are many people who think they're acknowledging tribes in many ways that could be offensive to the Native American community, and we work very closely with the Puyallup tribe. So I think being careful to acknowledge them in the way they want to be acknowledged is very important. And then, yes, it does get people thinking. It does. I think people live their everyday lives without ever thinking about tribes and tribal land and reservations, any of that. We're unique because the Puyallup Reservation, part of the city of Tacoma, is in the reservation. They're an urban tribe. So yeah, I think it does get people thinking, and it does, you know, connect people to that community and all of that good stuff, you know, creating discourse and all of that. But it's really not about that. It's about the acknowledgement part.
That's a great point. Well, I think we're out of time, so I'm gonna close this off. Lauren, it has been wonderful to have you here. Thank you very much. To everyone who has been participating, I invite you to continue the conversation over in our events virtual cafe. I think the link will show up in our chat in just a moment here. You can use the same password you did to get in here. This is a space that's open all day. It's a more informal Zoom space where you can turn on your camera and you can unmute your mic if you'd like to talk. The next session up is an interview with Roberto Lovato. It begins on the hour, and he is the author of Forgetting or Unforgetting, a memoir of family migration, gangs, and revolution in the Americas. And finally, I hope that you'll end this virtual conference with us today by coming to the keynote session at 4 p.m. Eastern with Drew Lanham. He is the author of the award-winning book, The Home Place, Memoirs of a Colored Man's Love Affair with Nature. And even if you didn't register for these next two sessions, you can still attend. Just follow the links on the schedule page and use the same password that you used to access this session. Thank you all so much for being here. Take care, everyone, and stay well.
Thank you.